Successful negotiation goes beyond presenting arguments. It's about strategic communication, active listening, and reading nonverbal cues. These skills build rapport, clarify misunderstandings, and create win-win solutions. Active listening ensures both sides feel heard and valued. Engaging fully, paraphrasing key points, and asking clarifying questions demonstrate respect and encourage openness. This approach uncovers underlying concerns and strengthens trust. Persuasion techniques enhance negotiation effectiveness. Storytelling makes positions relatable, while framing aligns messages with the other party's values. Strategic concessions build goodwill and encourage reciprocity. Nonverbal communication is equally critical. Open body language, eye contact, and mirroring establish rapport, while a calm tone reinforces authority. Observing the other party's gestures and expressions provides insight into their mindset. By refining communication strategies, negotiators gain confidence, influence outcomes, and create agreements that serve both sides.
Keld, should we be thinking about concessions when we're having a negotiation? Or with your negotiation economics, is it not really like what you're giving up?
Yes and no. Once again, let me take another step back and say, why do organizations negotiate? Now, I call myself a commercial negotiator, so I let Susan cover the private part and I talk about business, I assume just like Josh and Linda. And what I say is, why is it two organizations negotiate with each other? They do it for one reason only, and that is to create and distribute value. I repeat that, to create and distribute value. And what I often see in some negotiators' world is that they feel they have to argue a lot. So they go in there and they don't negotiate. I call it heckling. They argue, we should get a better price because of, or we should get better payment term because of. And this segment obviously talk about communication and active listening. It's one of the secrets to be a great negotiator, and I'm sure that the panel will agree with me, is that listening, really listening, not listening because you want to prepare what you're going to say yourself, but really listening to the value, the background, the interest of the counterpart, and then asking questions. If I should put just one word on what separates the great negotiator from the not so good negotiator, is the ability to really listen and ask qualified questions. So for instance, if you came to me and said, I would like to change delivery time, I should not reply, we can't do that, or we would love to do that. Instead of should ask, what is the value to you? What is it you want to change that delivery time? And, ask for something in return. So you just use the word concession. I'm not a big fan of concessions. Unilateral concessions especially are dangerous, because if I get something away for free, you may misunderstand that and feel that, hey, that was easy. If I started this negotiation giving you 3% discount, you might be feeling, hey, we've been sitting here for 5 minutes. If I got 3% that easy, why wouldn't I get 5 or 7? So unilateral concession is a no-go in my world. But even more importantly, I just want to repeat that, ask question and truly, truly listen. And I feel, and that's the last thing, I don't want to talk more because we have lots of bright people on the panel, but we have lost the ability to listen as human beings. I don't know whether we should blame social media or what, but we have a tendency to be worse off listening to each other than ever before. And that's really a key thing. Dr. Dan Shapiro from Harvard has a lot of knowledge about that and called it the tribal effect. So if anybody's interested, dive into Dr. Dan Shapiro.
And if you don't mind me backing on to what Keld said is, it's living in the question. It's when in doubt, you ask a question. And that's, you had said, why do we prepare it? So we can be present. What I like as a definition of negotiations, it seems to take some pressure off my students and off the people I've worked with, is it's a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. So it's a discussion. We're not trying to beat each other up. We're not trying to out-strategize each other. We are really aiming at trying to agree. It may not work. We may walk away. Our agreement may be we can't have a deal right now. But that Oxford Dictionary definition is a really good one that kind of takes some pressure off and makes it more of that conversation you were talking about.
How does one react to if you feel like the other side's being too aggressive in their negotiation?
I can go with that question.
Sure.
It takes two to escalate, for the most part. if one person begins to escalate, there's nothing like, excuse me, I need to go get a drink of water. Take a break. I tell my clients anger is a stop sign. What do you do at a stop sign? Hopefully you stop. So if somebody's escalating, take a break or pause or change the topic and bring the tone down. Why do people escalate? They escalate in order to dominate and get their way. That's not collaborative problem solving. I like what Linda said. It should be a discussion, a collaborative dialogue. And as soon as the tone intensifies or there's negative energy coming out, you da-da-da-da, or there's no listening. Keld, you were right on in terms of couples and families. Listening and tone are probably the two critical dimensions.
Josh, you wanted to say something.
No, I very much agree with Susan. And one of the kind of things that I often will say to folks that I'm working with or whomever is, the one thing that you have control over in the negotiation is your reaction and your response. And so managing that is really critical. And what the other negotiator does is important, but it's also not defining. And so you can control how you act and how you approach things. And I think it's really important, that again, if you go back to the notion about incomplete information, which I think is such an important dynamic, we gather information by asking good questions, to Keld's point, right? That when we ask a question, an open-ended kind of question, when we're kind of probing and thinking, often we get information back that is really, really valuable. And it helps us to sort of think about what's possible, given where we are and what the circumstances are. And so I'm a really big fan of that. And I think listening is hard because we tend to have a internal conversation that's going on in our mind during a negotiation or during any kind of conflict or whatever it might be. We start to ready our response. And when we do that, we're no longer listening. And I think that's a classic mistake that a lot of people make. And what really gets in the way of us actually really listening well is starting to think especially when somebody says something that you don't agree with, or maybe that you think their perception is off. You're thinking in your mind, I've got to correct that perception before anything else happens. And while you're doing that, right, nothing else is getting in. So I think it's very important to understand that dynamic and to kind of clear your mind. I've worked with folks who do a lot of improv and training people in thinking to be present. And one of the things that's that really comes out of that is that you do clear your mind and you're not starting to think down the road, but you're actually in the moment and really listening carefully. And in the little clip, Andy, last quick thing, which is you mentioned stories. I'm a very big fan of stories. I think they have a way of disarming the other negotiator. I've had scenarios where people often say, what do I do when I'm trying to collaborate with somebody and they're being very competitive? And the best response I have is share a story of what something could look like, or you've had a past negotiation that's similar to this, and here's how you dealt with that kind of a situation, because people tend to view stories very differently. And then, interestingly enough, there's some really fascinating research by some folks at Stanford that say that when you start telling people a story in a realm like negotiation, they begin to see themselves in that story, even though they weren't even there. But they can imagine what that might look like.
Andy, I wanted to add one more thing. I wrote another book called Stop Complainers and Energy Drainers, and it's how to negotiate work drama to get more done. And the research behind that was really surprising, because I really had one or two people that kind of irritated me, and they would get angry, and I, felt different ways around them. But there were actually more ways that people showed anger. We found 5 big ways that people could show and show emotion, and it was usually around a need not being filled. So, we had whiners, and we had the complicators, and we had these really aggressive, assertive people, and we had, and we went through all of those. But the big thing was being curious. So when you're asking questions, your mindset is really, I wonder why this person is usually calm is doing this. Wonder what need they're trying to fill. And that helps you stay calm yourself. If you can just say, okay, I'm like a reporter. I'm just going to ask questions, see if I can figure out, is this person overreacting to get attention, or do they feel like they're not connected, or do they feel like things aren't getting done, or things aren't organized or stable? What's going on? And if you can live there, that helps you not engage, which is really, that's the beauty about negotiation, is if you can get to reality and kind of think more logically, you can probably help solve the problem or help them see a way through the problem.
Keld, is the active listening and asking good questions, is that the gateway to building trust, which is so important?
Absolutely, and showing an interest in the counterpart, obviously. I don't know if any of you have tried to travel to Asia, and I mention Asia specifically because their understanding of hospitality is so much more advanced than here in the West. So let's assume, Andy, that you check into the Oriental in Bangkok, right? Known as one of the better hotels in the world. And you check in and you go to a room and you're unhappy with your room. So you go back to the reception at the Oriental to complain. Now, how do you think the staff at the reception at the Oriental are going to behave? Are they going to argue with you and say, "Oh, Andy, shut up. You're checked into one of the best hotels in the world. Go back to your room or you can leave"? No, they're not going to do that. Are they going to agree with you and say, "You're absolutely right, Andy. You got the worst room in the entire hotel"? No, they're not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're saying, "Andy, I understand you feel there's a problem. Let me see if I can help you deal with that problem you feel you got." Did you get that? They don't agree, they don't disagree, they just show empathy, right? So I understand my counterpart. And what I often find, Andy, that a lot of negotiators who messes up big time is that they guess or they assume what the counterpart wants. I often sit with clients that are saying, "Well, we know what they want." And I say, "How do you know that?" "Well, they always want that." "Okay, so you know it now. What they always wanted is also what they want tomorrow." We're not allowed to assume or guess. We need to know. So back to what we just talked about right now. Questions and listening and really showing true empathy is essential to be successful in any negotiation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now I want to go to the Mandarin Oriental and live my best life. Let's go to segment 3.